Learning how to properly pre-grade your Pokemon cards is essential when you want to learn how to go from a raw Pokemon card to a graded Pokemon card. And this is for whether you're trying to add a new tool to your business model or you're just looking for something else to collect. Hi, I'm Craig with Legendary Cardboard, and today I'm going to walk you through my process on how I pre-grade to decide what cards I'm going to send off for grading. Now, currently, I only grade with PSA, and that's because PSA in the market holds pretty much the liquidity and value. You can get into scenarios where certain cards would be better off to be graded with BGS or CGC to search for that black label, pristine, which would increase the value of that particular card versus a PSA 10. But I stick with modern. I only grade modern, and the more more modern, the better. Now, first thing, let's discuss the tools that I utilize to go into my pre-grading. Now, some of you watching this might think that I do things a little extreme, but I'm a pretty tough pre-grader in order to determine what cards I'm going to send off. I currently hold around an 80% on average gem rate when sending cards to PSA. Now, the first thing I utilize is the powder-free medical gloves, rubber gloves. This is to prevent any sort of fingerprints, oils, anything that's on your hands. I just prefer to avoid all those things while I'm handling the cards. Second thing, to get rid of any oils, fingerprints that might be on the card is a microfiber towel or a little cloth. This is the type of microfiber cloth that you might find. It comes with like glasses, sunglasses and such to wipe the lenses. I typically like to use a brand new cloth each time. However, if I don't do a ton of cards with one cloth, I will reuse. But then that one gets tossed out. Another tool I utilize is a centering tool. Centering tool has a bunch of lines and numbers on it, which we'll go over more once we get into centering on the cards. And then the last tool I utilize is a magnifier with built-in, there we go, LED lights. So this is going to enhance anything. If I have any questions on it, on something I may see, I bust out the magnifier with some lights just to help me see what exactly is going on with the card. Now, we've gone over the equipment that I use, but before we actually dive into pre-grading cards, we need to know what standards we are actually basing this off of. So let's head on over to the PSA website. Okay, here's the PSA homepage. From there, we'll go to the info center at the top, and we want to go to grading standards. Now, when we're on grading standards, here we can see what exactly PSA's criteria is for each of the grades. So here we see PSA 10. It's going to give you a paragraph on exactly what they're looking for to give it a 10. Key things here are the percentages allowed on the front and back of the card for when it comes to centering, which we'll get into more when we go over each category. But over here on the right, you can kind of click through and see what are the exact standards for each numeric value that PSA is grading off of. Now that we've gone over the standards, I'm going to show you my process on how I go about pre-grading my cards. So let's switch it to here. Now, of course, I've got a glove on. Now, when I wear the gloves, I only wear it on my left hand. I wear one glove on my left hand. I keep this one here, and this will be for grabbing the cards if I need to just grab it. And then if I want to lift it up with there, I use a penny sleeve and actually slide it up under the card to grab it. And then if I do grab it with my bare hand, it's always on the edges. Okay, making sure we're not fingerprinting, getting oils, anything like that on the card. So starting off, when I decide to go through cards to pre-grade, the first thing I look at anything is the back of the card, because if anything, that's generally where things are going to go crazy, considering that all the Pokemon cards are English wise are that blue on the back side. So if you see some white jumping out at you instantly and it looks pretty bad, I just stop there and I pass. It's a hard pass for me. Now we can go into stuff like this. Now you'll see on this card, this corner some white showing, this corner some white showing. And then those are pretty obvious, but then there is some small whitening up here. Now, if these two weren't here on these corners, and it was only that one white, that small white dot at that top of that corner, I would pass this card for my first initial test and I would move on from there. But because of those two corners down there, those bigger corners, it's a pass. This card is, I'm going to set it to the side. I'm not even going to go through with looking at the rest of it. My rule of thumb I stick with is I don't like to go past two corners having any sort of whitening. If I see two corners on there, or more than two corners that are showing whitening, I'm just immediately passing on that card, along with the edges as well. If this card passed, I would now move on to centering. Centering the card, I always put it into the penny sleeve. Okay, I've watched people do this, not putting on this penny sleeve, and you risk scratching up the surface of the card, because I like to take my centering tool now, the one I showed you in the beginning, and we lay it flat on the card. And if the card didn't have any protection, you're running the risk now of scratching it all up. For centering, what we're talking about is the border. So the yellow border, right? Yellow border around the card. Or for current, modern, more modern cards, it's the silver, right? Around the cards. But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about centering. And these centering tools, these are very inexpensive on Amazon. There's some better than this one. This one's primarily meant for sports cards. But what you're doing is you're going to lay it in there, get it aligned on there with the centering tool, and then you're going to read where the inside hits these numbers, right? Each line is numbered. So where the inside, where the yellow stops moving in towards the card, what line is that matched up with? And those are going to correlate with numbers, okay? Same with the top and bottom. Then with those numbers you get, you're going to match it with your centering percentage guide that comes with your centering tool, okay? So there you go. So let's say we're here. It's kind of on the off the cusp. We're looking at it. I mean, this is a pretty well centered card. A 2 on the sides and a 2. 2 and 2. We look at that. Okay. We're 50-50, so that's obviously perfect for PSA. Now let's look at a card that may not be perfect. So here you can see right off the bat, just by the naked eye, that hey, this card is super heavy on the left side. Okay, throwing our tool on there. Now when we hold our tool on this one, this border is lined up with about the 2, that dashed line, the 2. Now on this side, it goes, you can see the border goes past that dash line. You see it's sitting in between the 2 and the 3. So we'd go over here, we'd check our tool, and we'd say, okay, we got a 2 on one side, a 3 on the other. Well, a 3-2, that's 60-40. And if we remember the PSA website, 60-40 was a good to go. Another thing is the bold glow indicates 60-40 or better. So anything that's bold in the black, according to this tool, they're saying it's good to go for centering. Sometimes it may say, your tool may say that, hey, it's good to go, but if you're looking at it, another thing that PSA has come out and said before is it may fall under their centering guidelines. However, if it's not aesthetically pleasing, like it doesn't look good, like this does not look good, it's very clearly that it's off, then more likely they're not going to give it a 10. I need to check the centering on the back as well. So the back, they're a little more lenient on. If you remember looking at the front page, it was 75-25. But even with this, right, you can see that the back is no better. Super heavy on the right side now, according, you know, and really thin border on the left. So this card would definitely be a hard pass when it came to centering. Now, after I got my centering all figured out, and a card has cleared that process, I then go into the surface. And the surface being, I'm looking for any sort of scuffing or scratches, dents, dings, divots, anything like that that would be something that would warrant downgraded from a 10 because of the surface. And that's where I bust out my little magnifier. I'm not so worried about magnification at this point, mainly for the light. And so what I like to do is I take my magnifier. I take my magnifier and I hold it at an angle so I can get the light on there. And what I want to do is I want the light to shine so I can look at the card at an angle with the light shining on it to look for any sort of swirling, scratching, scuffing, any divots. And then if I start to say like, oh, hey, I noticed something, that's when I bust in my magnifier to figure out what's going on. If it's something that can maybe be wiped off, or if it's something kind of permanent on the card. Then once I check out the front of the card, I do the same on the back side again. And having that glove on saves me here while I'm holding the card like this. But still looking for any sort of scratching, scuffing, anything like that. Okay, and then once I'm done with checking the surface out, okay, this is when I bust out my cloth, and no matter what, I always wipe down. Even if I didn't see anything, it's just precautionary, or any dust or any little spots or anything that may have got on there. Always, I wipe it down every single time, and then wipe down the front. And this is where it's important we use that microfiber cloth. You know, typically a fresh one, just nice and gentle. I'm not digging into the card. It's just a nice gentle wipe down just to ensure nothing got on it while I was pre-grading. And then it would go back into a fresh penny sleeve. Now let's take a look at some graded cards so we can kind of see. The best way to get good at pre-grading and grading cards is to send cards. You're not gonna, once you start getting some submissions done and seeing what cards what come back, you'll start kind of understanding more on what you can maybe get away with. Now every grader is going to be different. Now here we got a Gem Mint 10 of Mewtwo V from Pokemon Go, and as you can see, the centering looks pretty spot on. If anything, it does look a little heavy at the top, but not much. So what you can say is, even if it's not measured 50-50, I think we could all agree that aesthetically, that border looks pleasing, right? Everything on the front of the card looks nice, looks good. You could hold it up to the light at an angle and see that there's no scuffing, no scratches, no scrapes, okay? And then if we flip it over to the back side, here, that's just a glare. I know it may look like there's whitening, but that's just a glare right now. There's no whitening. So this is a card that on the back side looks a little heavy, just a smidge top and on the right, but still in the aesthetically pleasing and acceptable range for PSA. And then there's no whitening. You don't see any whitening that instantly jumps out at you. The corners look nice. And so this card would definitely be worthy of a Gem Mint 10. Let's take a look at another Gem Mint 10 where this gets into, I want to point out some things where it's okay to take certain chances and risks when sending some cards in that will 10. So right away, to me, it's not bad, but it almost looks like maybe it's a touch heavy on the right. Top to bottom look pretty good, but no, I would say generally no front issues with the card. Surface looks good, corners look good. But if we flip it around, whitening going on here on this corner, and then there is a touch of whitening in this corner as well. So, and then another touch of whitening in this corner. Okay. So that's what I'm saying about certain things. You'll start to learn what you can kind of take a chance on and still have that possibility of getting a Gem Mint 10. Now let's take a look at a 9 and kind of break down, reverse engineer, if you will, why it got a 9. Because right off the bat, just kind of overall looking at it, you know, there is something very glaringly wrong on the front. But let's look at the back real quick. The back, if anything, heavy on the top, but not too bad. It still looks really good as a card. Left to right looks pretty good. There's no whitening at all on this card. So the back, man, it's like, man, the back looks great. Now the front, okay, the front is where it gets dicey because we run into a centering issue. Now some of these cards like this, we're not just focusing on the silver, but as we see, we have the extra kind of border if you will, in here with the black line right running around the card. You can see the black line looks pretty, this black border, this line looks pretty well centered up top there, but on the right hand side, it is definitely not centered here. It's definitely not centered on the right side, and it's definitely not centered over here. Okay, you know, this card is off center due to the kind of the double border going on. That obviously downgraded it to a 9 due to the centering of the card. Okay, so I hope you were able to take something away from that, going over the criteria for grading with PSA, kind of me showing my process on what I do, what I look for, how I do it, and the tools that I utilize. Stay tuned. My next video I'm going to do is I'm going to continue on from here, where I show the process now of getting all the cards packaged up and ready to send off to PSA, and kind of what I do when it comes to that. So thanks for watching, and until next time, we'll see you down the road.